much. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Ms Jardine. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd also like to thank the honourable member for St Helens South and Wiston for securing this very important debate. Engagement without condition is not diplomacy, it is complicity. And promoting the values of democracy, respect for the rule of law and protection of religious freedoms must be the cornerstone of any serious British foreign policy, particularly foreign policy with a country that has outright rejected the values of democracy. Yes, China is a major global power. Yes, Britain must engage with it on trade, on climate change, on the great shared challenges of our time. But engagement cannot come at the cost of our principles. Because when we trade away our values, we diminish not only ourselves, but the very idea of Britain as a force for good in the world. An idea that has already taken a solid beating in recent years after the last government's cuts to DFID and this government's refusal to reverse them. We have accepted that the people of China will not have democracy, and that is a decision that will weaken their society from top to bottom. But to turn a blind eye to the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses requires quite the mental gymnastics, because they sit in plain sight. Their actions in Hong Kong are openly intended to snuff out any remaining hope of a return to democracy. Their openly autocratic ambitions for Taiwan are clearly in breach of an international order grounded in sovereignty and freedom, and a fear of the accountability that democracy enables. And most disturbingly of all, we've seen years of coverage, research and evidence what is clearly a genocide against the Uyghurs. It is true that some degree of realism holds water in the practice of international relations, but we on the Liberal Democrat benches are clear about where the red lines are. And we are clear that freedom of belief should not be reclassified as just a Western luxury. It is a universal human right set out in the UN Charter and established as a principle in the hearts and minds of conscientious people the world over. Yet in China, religion exists only at the pleasure of the state. China operates a centrally directed system of ideological control to stifle hearts as much as it stifles minds. It is clear that China operates a centrally directed, ideological and coercive policy of assimilation, which is rooted in ethnic nationalism, intolerance and the regime's demand for absolute authority. China's economic rise is undeniable. It has lifted millions out of poverty and reshaped the global economy. And under President Xi, China has become even more of a bold, systemic rival to the open, democratic, rules-based order that we believe in, leading some even in the West to try to argue that China's economic success warrants a rethink of the kinds of values we are willing to tolerate in the global order. But let me be clear. We must not follow that path to its logical and awful conclusion. A world where the liberal values that built not just strong economies but flourishing and vibrant societies are jettisoned in favour of nihilism and a belief that might makes right. That independence of thought is worth trading for raw economic output, and so Britain faces a choice, not whether to engage, as we must, but how we engage. Because I would consider silence in the face of oppression not as neutrality, but instead as at the very least weakness and at worst acquiescence. And I fear that this Labour government risks drifting into that silence. In their pursuit of closer economic ties with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, appear willing to turn the other cheek, not just to abuses in China, but here in our own country. In my constituency of Sutton Cheam and Worcester Park, I represent many Hong Kongers, people who came to this country because they believed Britain would stand for their freedoms when others would not. A belief encouraged by one of the few positive things the former member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip ever did as Prime Minister when he introduced the BNO scheme. And a belief that mattered urgently following the imposition of the national security law. We've all seen it unfold before our eyes. Independent media has been silenced in Hong Kong. Democratic voices are imprisoned. Academic and artistic voices that speak out against the CCP have all been chillingly dismantled. Thousands of people have been arrested as political prisoners, including the British national Jimmy Lai, who now faces the rest of his life in prison for daring to exercise his freedom of speech. And relevant to this debate today is how China has banned Jimmy Lai from receiving the sacrament from priests who occasionally visit him, a gross violation of his religious freedom. But instead of making this a priority, the Prime Minister has followed a strategy of kowtowing to Beijing, a strategy that has already compromised the UK's security. His green-lighting of the Chinese super embassy in the heart of London is frankly his biggest national security mistake to date and presents an open door for the ramping up of Chinese spying in our country. He has also sent the utterly shameful message to Hong Kongers, many of whom who have already been targeted, intimidated and coerced by the CCP here on our own streets, that he prioritises trade deals over their safety. It is time for the Prime Minister to show some backbone in his dealings with President Xi. He must call louder for the release of Jimmy Lai and challenge Xi personally on the bounties which have been raised against Hong Kong activists in the UK. He has spoken recently about putting the national interest first in his foreign policy, and I'd invite the Minister to confirm if the Prime Minister will take that approach when he next meets with the Chinese government, because it is clearly not the case today. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to ask him to confirm that nobody who is here through the B&O scheme because they wish to live freely in a democracy will be forcibly sent back into the CCP's arms if they fail to pass something as arbitrary as an English language test to qualify for ILR. And there are other critical things that this government must not shy away from discussing with Beijing. Because let us be clear, against the Uyghur Muslim population, the Chinese state has constructed a system of control so intrusive and calculated that it cannot be dismissed as anything other than coordinated genocide. We see mass internment camps, forced labour, relentless surveillance operating at an incredible scale. At the heart of the human rights abuses in Xinjiang, we see an attempt to erase the Uyghur identity itself. Faith, language and culture are being stripped away in the name of CCP control. This is a genocide. The Labour Party in opposition were willing to call it that, and Parliament voted in 2021 to recognise it as such. But this government has yet to confirm their position. So I will ask the Minister several questions in closing, each of which I hope he can speak to when he's on his feet. Because my constituents, British nationals and people around the world will want to hear his answer. So I ask the Minister to tell us candidly if economic calculations have led them to reverse their position on whether a genocide has taken place. And if he argues that they have not, then I invite him to, without compromising classified information, present evidence to the House to support that claim. I also ask him to confirm whether or not sanctions are still under review for individuals and entities complicit in infringements on freedom of speech, religion or belief, or any other manner of human rights abuses. And on trade and supply chains, will the Minister commit to a ban on imports from regions where there is documented evidence of forced labour? If not, why not? And if so, can he confirm that these will be Majinsky-style sanctions that make use of the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2018? I really do hope the Minister can answer these questions in his remarks, because the British public deserve to know, ahead of the next China visit, whenever it may occur, which path the government has chosen. That silent acquiescence and weakness I refer to, or a Britain that has the courage of its convictions and isn't afraid to call out injustice on the world stage once more. Thank you.